Imagine you're standing alone in a prehistoric landscape at the edge of an unfamiliar forest. Hunger has been building for days, and every step brings you past berries, roots, mushrooms, and leaves you've never seen before. Somewhere among them is the food that will keep you alive through another week. Somewhere else is a plant capable of shutting down your heart, destroying your liver, or leaving you too weak to escape the next predator. None of them come with warning labels. None look obviously dangerous. The only way to find out is to eat. It seems almost impossible that our ancestors ever escaped this deadly guessing game. They had no chemistry to identify toxic compounds, no biology to explain why certain plants were poisonous, no written records preserving generations of experience. Every new landscape confronted them with thousands of unfamiliar species, each carrying its own hidden risks. Yet somehow, humans became the most adaptable eaters on Earth, spreading from African savannas into frozen tundras, dense rainforests, deserts, and mountain ranges, while learning to survive on entirely different diets. So how did they do it? How did a species that understood nothing about alkaloids, cyanide, or poisonous fungi manage to separate food from fatal mistakes well enough to survive for hundreds of thousands of years? The answer wasn't a single breakthrough or one extraordinary discovery. It was an entire survival system built layer upon layer through evolution, observation, memory, and culture. In fact, parts of that ancient system are still quietly working inside your body every time you take a bite of something unfamiliar. Long before humans began solving this problem, plants had already spent millions of years evolving chemical weapons designed for one purpose: convincing hungry animals that eating them was a very bad idea. The remarkable story isn't that those defenses existed, it's that humans eventually learned to overcome them. Plants may seem passive, but from an evolutionary perspective, they have spent hundreds of millions of years locked in a silent arms race with the creatures that eat them. Unable to run, hide, or fight back, they evolved a different strategy. They filled their leaves, seeds, roots, and fruits with an astonishing variety of chemical defenses. Some compounds interfere with digestion, making a meal far less rewarding than it appears. Others attack the nervous system, damage organs, or release poisons when plant tissues are crushed or chewed. Every bite taken by an animal became a test of whether those defenses were strong enough to discourage another attempt. For early humans, this created an enormous challenge. Survival depended on eating a wide range of foods, yet every unfamiliar plant carried an invisible question: nourishment or poison? The remarkable thing is that evolution had already begun providing part of the answer long before anyone understood what toxins actually were. Hidden across the surface of your tongue is a family of roughly 25 bitter taste receptors known as TAS2RS. These receptors aren't there by accident. They function as tiny chemical detectors, constantly sampling whatever enters your mouth before it reaches the rest of your body. Many naturally occurring plant toxins, including numerous alkaloids and other defensive compounds, activate these receptors, producing the unmistakable sensation we call bitterness. In a world without laboratories or written knowledge, flavor became one of nature's earliest warning signals. Natural selection gradually refined this system through an unforgiving process. Imagine two individuals sampling the same unfamiliar plant. One notices an intensely bitter taste and spits it out after a single bite. The other barely detects the warning and eats much more. If the plant contains dangerous toxins, only one of those individuals is likely to survive long enough to raise children. Across thousands upon thousands of generations, even slight improvements in poison detection accumulated, making bitterness one of humanity's oldest survival instincts. Of course, bitterness is only one part of a much larger sensory language. Sweetness usually signals sugars, offering quick energy that every hungry forager desperately needed. Umami points toward amino acids, hinting at valuable sources of protein. Saltiness helps identify essential minerals that the body cannot function without, while sourness often suggests unripe fruit, fermentation, or spoilage, encouraging greater caution before another bite. Together, these basic tastes form a surprisingly sophisticated chemical screening system that still guides every meal you eat today. But evolution rarely produces perfect solutions. Plenty of poisonous substances aren't especially bitter, and many perfectly safe foods are. Some nutritious vegetables owe their sharp taste to harmless compounds, while certain deadly mushrooms can seem surprisingly mild. Your tongue could improve the odds, but it could never eliminate the risk entirely. If taste wasn't enough to guarantee survival, ancient humans needed another source of information, one that didn't depend on taking the first dangerous bite themselves. The remarkable thing is that evolution didn't stop at building chemical sensors into the tongue. It also shaped the way the human mind approaches unfamiliar food before a single bite is ever taken. Long before children can understand the idea of poison, or even hold a conversation about danger, they already behave as though they know that unknown plants deserve special caution. Researchers at Yale University explored this idea in a series of clever experiments led by psychologists Annie Wirtz and Karen Wynn. They worked with toddlers only about 18 months old, children far too young to have learned detailed rules about edible and poisonous plants. Yet the results suggested something extraordinary. When presented with unfamiliar vegetation, these young children didn't simply imitate whatever adults happened to be doing around them. Instead, they actively looked for social cues before deciding whether a plant was safe. If a trusted adult confidently handled or ate it, the children became much more willing to accept it themselves. Without that reassurance, they consistently hesitated. That hesitation points to something much deeper than ordinary imitation. It suggests the human brain may come equipped with an inherited expectation that unfamiliar plants are potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. Rather than assuming everything is edible, the default setting is caution. This fits neatly into what evolutionary psychologists call the omnivore's dilemma. Unlike highly specialized animals, humans can survive on an astonishing variety of foods. That flexibility allowed our ancestors to spread across almost every environment on Earth, adapting to forests, grasslands, mountains, deserts, and frozen tundra. But versatility comes with an unavoidable cost. Every new habitat introduces unfamiliar plants, fungi, and animals, each presenting the same life or death question. Species with highly restricted diets rarely face this problem. A koala spends its life eating eucalyptus leaves, while a giant panda specializes almost entirely on bamboo. Humans, however, evolved to exploit whatever resources were available, meaning curiosity became essential for survival. Yet unchecked curiosity could be fatal. Evolution therefore balanced exploration with restraint, encouraging people to seek new foods while making them instinctively wary of eating them too quickly. Scientists refer to this tendency as food neophobia, the natural reluctance to consume unfamiliar foods. Today, it often appears as childhood pickiness or hesitation towards strange dishes while traveling abroad. In prehistoric environments, however, that same reluctance may have prevented countless deadly mistakes. A child who refused an unfamiliar berry until watching experienced adults safely eat it first was far more likely to survive than one who sampled everything within reach. Even so, instincts could only reduce risk, not eliminate it. Human psychology offered a valuable head start, but surviving an unfamiliar landscape required another source of knowledge altogether. Our ancestors found it by looking beyond themselves and paying close attention to the creatures that already called those environments home. If your own senses and instincts couldn't answer every question, the next safest strategy was surprisingly simple. Let someone else take the first risk. Sometimes that someone else wasn't another human at all. It was the wildlife already thriving in the same landscape. Imagine arriving in a valley you've never seen before. Every shrub, vine, and tree is unfamiliar, but the forest is far from silent. Birds return to the same berry bushes day after day. Monkeys strip fruit from particular branches while ignoring others growing only a few meters away. Deer graze confidently across certain patches of vegetation without ever touching neighboring plants. To an observant human, this wasn't just ordinary animal behavior. It was information. Ethnographers studying indigenous foraging societies have documented that careful observation of wildlife still plays a role in identifying potential food sources. Animals often provide valuable clues about what may be edible, especially when entering unfamiliar territory. Watching what species repeatedly consume and what they consistently avoid can dramatically narrow the number of dangerous possibilities long before anyone takes a bite themselves. But this strategy came with an important catch that early humans eventually learned through experience. Different animals don't experience the natural world the same way we do. Their bodies are built differently, their digestive systems process chemicals differently, and their tolerance for toxins can be astonishingly unlike our own. Goats, for example, can consume plants containing compounds that would leave humans severely ill. Many birds happily eat berries carrying toxins that pass harmlessly through their digestive systems, but could prove dangerous to mammals. Koalas survive on eucalyptus leaves loaded with chemicals that most other animals couldn't tolerate in large quantities because millions of years of evolution reshaped their biology specifically for that diet. That meant animal behavior could never serve as absolute proof. A monkey eating a particular fruit suggested it deserved attention, not blind trust. Over generations, humans refined this observational strategy into something much more sophisticated than simple imitation. They didn't merely remember which plants animals ate, they remembered which animals tended to make reliable guides for human diets and which ones regularly consumed foods that people needed to avoid. Gradually, every landscape became a living map assembled from thousands of careful observations. Certain birds pointed toward seasonal berries. Particular mammals revealed hidden roots or nuts buried beneath the soil. Other species acted almost like warning signs, thriving on foods that experience had already taught humans to leave alone. The forest itself became easier to read, not because the plants had changed, but because people had learned to recognize the patterns hidden within them. Observation dramatically reduced uncertainty, but it could never remove it entirely. The most reliable survival knowledge wasn't gathered in a single lifetime, it accumulated slowly across generations, growing more accurate with every lesson remembered and every mistake that never had to be repeated. Eventually, the greatest advantage humans possessed wasn't sharper senses or stronger stomachs. It was the ability to remember. More importantly, it was the ability to make sure those memories survived the people who first earned them. Every poisonous plant successfully identified, every dangerous mushroom avoided, every root that became safe only after boiling or soaking represented knowledge that had often been purchased at an enormous cost. Unlike an instinct, this information didn't have to be rediscovered by each new generation. Once learned, it could be shared, corrected, expanded, and preserved. That simple difference changed everything. Imagine two neighboring groups entering the same unfamiliar valley. One has no prior knowledge of the local plants. Every meal becomes a dangerous experiment, and every mistake risks another life. The other arrives carrying generations of accumulated experience. They already know which berries ripen safely after the first frost, which roots must never be eaten raw, and which trees produce edible nuts only after careful preparation. Both groups face the same environment, but only one possesses centuries of invisible experience packed into the memories of its people. Anthropologists often describe humans as a species defined not simply by intelligence but by cumulative culture, the extraordinary ability to build knowledge over time instead of constantly starting from scratch. A beaver today builds dams much like its ancestors did thousands of years ago. A bird constructs a nest using instincts shaped largely by evolution. Humans, by contrast, inherit not only genes, but information. Every generation begins where the previous one left off. Long before writing existed, that information traveled through stories, demonstrations, rituals, and repeated practice. A child didn't need to understand cyanide chemistry to know that a particular root had to be soaked overnight before cooking. They didn't need to study toxicology to remember never to eat the glossy red berries growing beneath a certain shrub. Survival lessons became woven into daily life until they felt less like instructions and more like unquestionable facts about the world itself. Within many hunter-gatherer societies, elders became something far more valuable than simply the oldest members of the group. They were living libraries. Decades of accumulated observation allowed them to recognize subtle seasonal changes, identify edible plants at different stages of growth, and remember rare events that younger people had never witnessed. A severe drought, an unusually early frost, or a year when familiar foods suddenly became dangerous might occur only once in a lifetime, yet that knowledge remained available because someone had lived through it and could pass the lesson forward. Remarkably, the information itself often became simpler as its importance grew. Complex biological realities were distilled into short, memorable rules that anyone could follow. Never eat the seeds. Always peel the skin first. Harvest only after the flowers appear. Boil before cooking. Avoid the bright sap. Behind each instruction lay generations of careful observation, forgotten experiments, and occasionally tragic failures. Yet, the person receiving the advice didn't need to know any of that history for the rule to save their life. This is one of culture's greatest strengths. It allows practical knowledge to survive even when the underlying science remains completely unknown. Ancient people couldn't explain enzymes, alkaloids, or metabolic pathways, but they didn't need to. What mattered was that experience had revealed which behaviors consistently produced good outcomes and which ones led to disaster. Reliable results were preserved long before reliable explanations ever existed. As this process continued over thousands of generations, human knowledge became increasingly refined. Each discovery formed the foundation for another. Mistakes became rarer. Techniques became more sophisticated. And survival depended less on individual luck than on collective memory. In many ways, culture became humanity's most powerful evolutionary adaptation because it could improve far faster than biology ever could. But eventually, people stopped asking only the question that had shaped human survival for countless generations. Can we eat this? They began asking something far more ambitious instead. Can we change it so that we can? For tens of thousands of years, the safest answer to a suspicious plant had always been simple. Don't eat it. But at some point, human curiosity took an extraordinary turn. Instead of asking whether a dangerous food should be avoided, our ancestors began asking whether it could be changed. Few examples demonstrate that leap better than cassava. Today, cassava feeds hundreds of millions of people across Africa, South America, and parts of Asia. It is one of the world's most important staple crops, providing enormous amounts of calories in regions where many other crops struggle to grow. Yet hidden inside many varieties of cassava are cyanogenic glycosides, natural compounds that release cyanide when the plant's cells are broken apart during chewing or digestion. Eaten carelessly, bitter cassava can cause severe poisoning, long-term neurological damage, and in high enough doses, death. The remarkable question isn't why cassava is dangerous, it's why people continued eating it anyway. The answer was never blind courage. It was careful experimentation carried out over countless generations. Somewhere in the distant past, people discovered that boiling cassava dramatically reduced its toxicity. Others learned that grating the root before soaking it removed even more of the harmful compounds. Fermentation proved even more effective, allowing naturally occurring microorganisms to break down many of the chemicals responsible for releasing cyanide. Drying the processed root in the sun removed additional moisture and helped volatile compounds escape before the food was finally cooked. No single step solved the problem completely. It was the combination, grating, soaking, fermenting, drying, then cooking, that transformed a potentially deadly root into a dependable source of food. What makes this achievement so astonishing is that nobody involved understood the chemistry taking place. There were no laboratories measuring cyanide concentrations or scientists explaining enzymatic reactions. The process survived because it consistently worked. Families that followed the correct preparation methods remained healthy. Those who skipped crucial steps often paid a terrible price. Over generations, successful techniques were refined while dangerous shortcuts quietly disappeared along with the people who practiced them. Cassava was far from unique. Across North America, indigenous communities transformed acorns, naturally rich in bitter tannins, into nutritious flour by repeatedly soaking the crushed meal in fresh water until the unpleasant compounds were washed away. Around the world, cooking itself became one of humanity's greatest technological breakthroughs, destroying toxins, neutralizing anti-nutrients, and unlocking calories that would otherwise remain trapped inside plants. Long before anyone understood proteins, starches, or molecular bonds, people had already become remarkably skilled biochemical engineers through observation alone. Seen together, these discoveries reveal something profound. Humans were no longer adapting themselves to nature's chemical defenses. They were learning to dismantle those defenses using fire, water, microbes, and time as tools to reshape the natural world in ways no other species could. By now, humanity wasn't simply surviving nature's rules, it was beginning to rewrite them. When you step back and look at the full picture, it's clear that no single adaptation explains humanity's success. Survival wasn't entrusted to one remarkable discovery. It emerged from layer upon layer of protection, each one compensating for the weaknesses of the others. Your tongue became the first line of defense, quietly scanning every unfamiliar bite for chemical warning signs that had threatened generations before you. Your brain added another safeguard, making caution feel more natural than reckless curiosity whenever an unknown plant appeared. Observation expanded that knowledge even further, allowing people to learn from the animals around them instead of risking every lesson firsthand. Culture transformed individual experience into collective memory, ensuring that hard-earned discoveries survived long after the people who made them were gone. And finally, human ingenuity went a step beyond avoidance altogether, finding ways to strip poison from plants and transform dangerous foods into dependable sources of nourishment. None of these systems replaced the others. They overlapped, reinforced one another, and created a remarkably resilient survival strategy. If one layer failed, another often remained. Together they allowed a species with no microscopes, no chemistry, and no written science to solve one of nature's most unforgiving puzzles. That same ancient machinery has never disappeared. It simply operates in a world where supermarkets have replaced forests and food labels have replaced generations of oral tradition. Most of us will never need to identify a poisonous root or decide whether an unfamiliar berry is worth the risk, but the instincts that once made those decisions possible are still working quietly beneath the surface. So the next time something bitter makes you hesitate, even for the briefest moment, remember that you're experiencing far more than a simple reaction to flavor. You're feeling the echo of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, shaped by countless ancestors who learned, often at great cost, which bite meant life and which meant death. Their discoveries didn't vanish into history. They became part of you, still protecting every meal you eat today.